Good morning and welcome to Market Outsiders. It's Tuesday, July 15th. The markets have just opened. It's 9:30 a.m. here on a rainy East Coast. Jenny Ray, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Namaan. It's so good to be with you. I am excited. Today is 1 week before I have a teenager. And so I have 7 more days of having no teenagers in my house. And to be honest, I don't think on that day anything is going to happen, just like on the day that you turn 16. The limos don't come for you and everything doesn't change. But it does feel like a rite of passage that we're kind of like thinking about how to appropriately celebrate in our family. So I've been kind of informally polling some of my friends and other folks that I know that have older kiddos about what they did when the kids turned 13. And I'm like gathering some ideas, but I haven't landed on something yet. At 10, we did a grab bag celebration. So we put like 25 fun things to do inside a box, and my kiddo got to pick 10 of them. Um, and one of them was your choice, but all the other ones were like, mini golf or like go out to dinner at this specific place that you love or like go out to a movie, right? They were kind of like just a bunch of fun things. And that was a really cool way to celebrate 10 for us. But 13 feels big. I want to do something with my kids. Any ideas
Well,
from you?
I mean, the Market Outsiders gift would be like a stock or
Yeah, I mean, and what do we give him? Do we give him a penny stock to, try to teach him how to double your money overnight? Do we give him like one of the most valuable stocks? Do we give him Berkshire Hathaway? Like what, even thinking about that, it's kind of like which one marks 13 and why?
I'll have to do some thinking on that. The easier option is you just give him a Market Outsiders hat. And because he would have just barely been a teenager, he'll still think it's cool, but in
He's
six
going
months,
to
he'll
wear
think
it,
it.
and I'm going to take a lot of pictures of him in it also. It's true. We are at that like very sweet stage where I'm still cool. And so I'm relishing every minute just in case it changes. I'm
Mhm.
crossing my fingers that we might have this one. It'll happen with one of my other kids for sure. But this one I think I might have a shot at keeping it cool, keeping it close. But yeah, one of my friends does a big trip. Another one does like a big 13, cake that in the size of a 1/3, so they can do whatever they want to, but it has to be that way. But thinking about how to mark a special birthday like this feels really
Mhm.
valuable.
I know people, they do a rite of passage with their kids, and 13 is one of the ages that they do it. And like for boys, like the dad takes them out on a hunting trip or on a camping trip, and it's like meant to be a milestone type of experience where you can look back later and say, okay, like this is where I transitioned to another phase of my life. I thought that was a really good idea.
I like that. Yeah, we should think about that. Well, Naman, I'm excited to dive into the news today because I think we're going to make an uncommon um, connection, although I don't think that they're connected in the back end. I'll tell you one of the things that I felt like was a narrative buster when I started working in the corporate world. I used to feel like there were corporate masterminds, both on the communication side and also on the strategy side, who were like puppeteers, kind of just, playing with the market's emotions and working on consumers like that. And the closer that you get, the further you go behind the curtain where the Wizard of Oz lives, the more that you realize there are a lot of really smart people, but that kind of like masterminding coordination, I've never seen it in the actual real world. And I've worked both in comms. One of my first jobs out of college was working for a big comm shop in DC. And then after that, obviously working for Bain and in a lot of the CEO offices. So I feel like I would have seen it from either side or seen the link between the two. But today we have two really interesting pieces of news. And I think we're going to cover the one that will be less in the news. And I'm interested in that. At least this is my proposal to you. So I would say the two big news breaks this morning are inflation data and also NVIDIA's announcement, which led to in pre-market trading, over 5% stock bump. What might not seem interconnected between the two of those is that the NVIDIA data is very, very positive for the U.S. economy. NVIDIA last week passed any other company at becoming one of the most valuable companies in the world at over $1 trillion in market cap, which is pretty
4 trillion.
extraordinary. Sorry, yeah, sorry. Thank you. 4 trillion in market cap. Yeah, a trillion is just whatever yesterday's news, and so any market shift, right? Like when you think about NVIDIA, if you're going to buy a piece of a portfolio, any market shift for NVIDIA is a very significant shift. And so, if I buy my son a share of NVIDIA stock, then that piece is going to be a part of it. Maybe I should buy him a business though, Naman. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Um, I think he needs to create his first one. But anyhow, this tie between the NVIDIA data and the inflation data, it doesn't feel as coincidental to me as a lot of the other news that we look at. It's kind of like it's Tuesday, we're releasing this data, because both of them actually have impact in what's happening in government. So I think we should just take a look at the NVIDIA data, and then maybe I'd love to get your thoughts on that toward the end of the convo. Okay, awesome. I'm going to share my screen because I pulled up. By the way, if you guys are interested in looking at business data, this it could be outdated tomorrow because they'll change something about their algorithm. But I think that it is fascinating. I often will find business data on other pubs, and I feel like CNBC is doing a really remarkable job right now of pushing ads, but keeping their content free. So I often find myself going to the CNBC version of the news to try to get at least the first order insight for what's happening. So here's the high level, right? NVIDIA said it will resume H2O AI chip sales to China soon, following US government assurances. And so on Tuesday, it said it's filing applications with the US government to resume sales of its previously restricted H2O GPU to clients in China specifically. I think that's interesting, right? The US government has assured NVIDIA that licenses will be granted, and NVIDIA hopes to start deliveries soon. So this is very interesting news. Why is it resulting in a 5% stock bump? And then Naman, I'll get your reactions, right? It said Tuesday it hopes to resume sales of its H2O general processing units. In April, the US government told NVIDIA it would require a license to sell the chips to China. This is something that previously had just been a company decision, not a business and government tied decision. They had been designed specifically to bypass export controls on Beijing. And so they've really ramped up lobbying against these export controls. So what's been happening, the US government has been using NVIDIA chips as a part of a negotiating strategy with China. In addition, this is clearly a significant piece of NVIDIA's potential revenue, with the revenue that they're currently clocking and the market value that they currently have with a 5% bump. This is representing something that analysts think is a significant move. And so we'll get down, Naman, to some of this kind of under the fold stuff. But do you want to kind of let me just go up here for a second. Do you want to give just a high level view on this if you've been tracking the history of it? I don't know if you follow NVIDIA, but I know that you have really interesting perspective on them. So I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the major news of the day, both from a business perspective and from a markets perspective. As you mentioned, NVIDIA is the largest company in the world by market cap. That means it's the largest weighted company in both the NASDAQ index and the S&P 500, which means that when NVIDIA stock moves, the index moves either up or down. And so this is meaningful news for anyone who follows the markets. And I actually can see both sides of this. There are two major players in the AI race. It's the US and it's China. And if you think about this from a US perspective, there's real geopolitical considerations to think through when you think about, do you want a country that you've positioned yourself as an adversary against to kind of have access to kind of world leading technology in what is going to be the next major industry to shake up the global economy? And that's one of the reasons the export controls went into place to begin with. I take the other side of that view, which is you would actually rather provide the GPUs to China as opposed to incentivizing them to build up their own industry. And so, what NVIDIA has done, to the best of my understanding, is that they have developed GPUs that are still better than anything that China can produce internally, but not as powerful as its Blackwell GPU, which is like the latest and greatest chip that enables AI processes. And so it seems like a win-win, right? China gets something that's better than anything else they can get on the market, but the US knows that it's still a generation behind, what its own companies have access to. And what you are doing is you are, in a perfect world, you're incentivizing the Chinese to not develop their own version of NVIDIA as fast because that cottage industry just isn't there yet in terms of quality or in terms of kind of the quantity of chips that they can produce quickly. So I think what NVIDIA is trying to do and what the administration is trying to do here is thread the needle. How do we support like this US based company and this industry that's dominated by the US? China's a massive market, the second biggest market outside of the US for these chips. And how do we do that without handing a competitive advantage to a country that this administration sees as an adversary? So that's what I think is happening behind the scenes, and we can get into some of the implications for NVIDIA here in a minute. But that's the needle I think they're trying to thread.
Thanks, Naman. I think that's nuance that is super helpful here. Look, here's kind of what you just said, but said with data that I would be interested in understanding. What is the actual sales impact for NVIDIA here? And then what kind of economic activity does that enable China to have? Because again, if we have an outsized portion of of the benefit of that activity, AI is such an AI chip is an interconnected piece of an ecosystem. So yeah, it is, the opportunity to potentially pull it back, but staying on the front end, even just that couple month delay probably put China behind. But I don't know who the other players are in China. I don't know if you do. But cutting their market share in half, if it was 2% to 1% is not significant. Cutting their market share in half from 40%, which could have been actually a market leading position. 40% is usually, it's not, it doesn't usually require 51% of the market share in order to be a leader. You often simply you just have to be larger than other players. And so in a fairly fragmented market, it could be 2%, could be a market leadership position. It's not 2% and it's not 40%, but it's probably somewhere reasonably in between because there aren't a lot of chip makers that can play in this space. That's part of why NVIDIA is so valuable, is that it has the moat around it is that there are not a fragmented market that is competing against them. So there aren't price challenges, there are technology advantages, there are delivery advantages, there are scale advantages. And so I don't know how many players there are or who else would be in market share, but that would be one of the first pieces of data that I'd want to go look at. What is China's market map for these chips? And like Naman just mentioned, I thought your point was really well taken. I wouldn't just want to say, what are the chips, right? Who is the maker? Because that would be like being like, what are all Ford cars in terms of a market share? That doesn't really matter. What really matters is in trucks, is Ford the market leader with its Ford F-250, Ford F-350, right? It's like it's thinking like really down to the model level when you're actually going into the data. So having the right data here helps you understand a little bit more about what's going on. Naman, you want to go
Yeah,
below the fold? Are we ready for this?
let's do it. I think the only other piece
Okay.
of data I'd want there is if I look at market share, I also want to look at market size. And so, like, I know that China is the second largest market in the world for these chips, but I actually don't know what that size is in dollar value. And that's the calculation I'd want to do. What's our share? Sure, but share of what size of market? And that's the other piece of data I'd want to look at.
If the US market is $1 trillion for AI chips, and the Chinese market is the second largest and it's 4 million, which is, I mean, it's totally possible, right? You have to have so much more than just the need for chips. You have to have engineers, chip makers, right? I'm guessing that these are actually going to be manufactured in China. So they'll be sold in China and manufactured in China. So you have to have manufacturing capacity, and then you have to have the entire ecosystem building on top of it as well. So it's kind of a very interconnected thing. In fact, Naman, you remember our conversation about if you stripped out the five largest companies in California and Texas, what would happen? I went and looked at some of the data because I was really interested to see, like, GDP, I'm not sure is actually always the right measure of competition between states. I think that employment rates and housing starts, and there are like other things that we think about. But when I was looking at the actual data, NVIDIA is obviously in California, so it has an outsized impact. Um, but I felt like some of the analysis would be very interesting to do because it talked about all the after effects. Like NVIDIA isn't NVIDIA. NVIDIA is the entire AI industry in California. So if you strip out NVIDIA and NVIDIA, goes away, doesn't exist, operates somewhere else, what about everybody who is potentially going to manufacture NVIDIA chips? Is that going to be in California or is that going to be somewhere else? What about the sales effects if you move one of those companies to another places? I just think like the intricacies of that was really in like the oil and gas companies in both states were very fascinating to look at that for because there were so many other mechanical suppliers, engineering, tech, planning, like other suppliers that went
And
into that process.
there are whole cottage industries that serve these large companies.
And I mean,
Say
entire industries, billion
entire
dollar
industries.
plus industries.
Mhm.
Yes.
And when, for example, when Samsung decides that they're going to build a new, like a $20 billion plant in Central Texas, their suppliers follow. And that's one of the reasons that you have incentives for these companies to move to a certain state or a certain country, because the smart economic development people know that it's not just that company you're attracting, but you're attracting kind of the downstream supply chain and value chain as well. And those suppliers are going to relocate also. And so absolutely. You can't look at these companies in a vacuum.
But are they going to buy their stuff from Home Depot? That's just what I want to know, Naman. Are they wandering in, grabbing some drywall here and there? Now they will, right? Not from the store though.
I'm
It's
not
like
even going to
all we
respond to that.
look. I've watched multi-billion dollar companies walk into Home Depot and buy stuff off the shelf, so I won't say it's above them. But I'm just kind of talking about the fact that there's a lot we don't see, right? If you think only as a consumer, there's just a lot that we don't see. But anyhow, I think that this is what I was talking about earlier. I'm glad it's in the article. But Washington and Beijing last month agreed to a preliminary trade framework that allowed relaxing rare earth export controls by China, one of their negotiating chips, and tax export curbs by the US. So this deal doesn't actually just signify an NVIDIA deal, it actually signifies a US-China conversation advancement that hasn't happened up until now. Because if those were the two bargaining chips that everybody had put on the table and created for leverage for each other, a relaxation of this means that that conversation is moving forward. I do, however, want to say I think this is a very strategic announcement by NVIDIA because they could have waited until they had the paperwork in hand from the US government and they didn't. Naman, you want to talk about why you think that might be or why you don't think it matters?
Well, to me, when you get good news like this, you announce it as soon as possible for two reasons. Number one, you kind of you back the administration into a corner because it makes it more difficult for them to change their mind later. And then number two, you want the share price
Leverage, right? Yeah, it's
appreciation.
it's
It's
public
leverage.
leverage.
It's public leverage. And then number two, you want the share price appreciation as fast as possible. But I think the reason that you announce it as soon as you've gotten the decision verbally is for that leverage.
Agreed. Um, so this, I think, is also interesting. Naman, I don't know if you've seen this news, but this would be something else that I'd want to understand, like understanding NVIDIA's deeper product portfolio. They've indicated that they're working on a new AI chip for the China even less advanced than the H2O. And so the release of the H2O, if you think about the comm strategy around this, it's like, hey, US government has said that we're going to be able to release this one. A stock bump increase is also testing the waters for what actually a potential expanded market would look like. A new AI chip less advanced than the H2O would probably not command the same price as the H2O, but would likely be more greenlit by the administration as well. And so, interesting strategy from a product development perspective in today's market, which is like we're actually going to intentionally create a cheaper, less functional version for a very key geopolitical strategic reason.
And if you're NVIDIA, I'm going to oversimplify here, but like in this business, there's three ways to grow, right? You sell the same number of chips for a higher price. That's number one. Number two, you enter new geographies. Number three, you introduce new products. And so what I'm seeing here is that you're not just going to be able to sell an existing product to a new market, but you're also going to introduce a new product. And those two are growth catalysts. And so I think the the China news from before, which was NVIDIA can't sell its advanced chips in China, was baked into the stock price. And when that news reverses, now all of a sudden you're seeing that the market is pricing in new expectations and new growth catalysts, which is why you're seeing that 5% bump this morning.
Agreed. So what are some of the pieces of analysis I'd want to do? I'd want to understand who the players are in China currently. I want to understand what the cottage industries are around this and where manufacturing would be likely to take place. I'd want to understand a little bit more about even just inferences around this timeline for this third tier piece of their portfolio, their product portfolio. But overall, I think analysts, retail, and institutional investors are saying we think that this means growth for NVIDIA that we actually didn't bake in. We clawed it back in our estimates. And assuming that a company is going to grow 40% a quarter, we already had an earlier, deeper episode about how unrealistic that would be. Honestly, this might bring them to those numbers going forward. So that's why you see such a significant jump here. Naman, if your game, I'd love to just go back to the initial conversation about the masterminding because to me, I when I looked at the news articles this morning, I actually don't read them like a list. I read them like a matrix. I try to figure out where one thing is connected to another. And when I look at this, I looked at the other news that came out today, which was inflation data, which is showing that inflation has resumed actually. And that was pretty significant news in light of the fact that we've come out in the past talking about why inflation data wasn't what people expected and how ridiculous we thought the reporting was on that. So the fact that inflation has resumed, largely driven by heavy tariff-driven categories, and this news breaking in the same day, inflation data news is going to come and affect markets in one of two ways. One is if it changes versus expectations. If your expectation was it would decrease and it went the other direction, that's going to cause a decline in the market, but it also impacts the likelihood of Fed rate changes. And Fed rate changes are largely driven by just two major pieces of data, employment data and inflation data. So if we're looking at this today, what we're looking at is NVIDIA news, good, markets up. Inflation news, not terrible and also not off of expectation, but also not great news, right? If it beat expectations, it would have been lower than expected and not as affected by tariff changes. And so when you see those two, like to me, I'm kind of like, wow, that's interesting. Today would be the day you'd want the NVIDIA news to break when you also have this inflation news breaking. So tell me your perspective on that. Do you think, you've worked in the government and also in private business. Am I wrong? I really don't think there's a mastermind here, but it seems oddly strategic. So do you think that there's something going on behind the scenes?
Possibly, which is a cop out answer, I'll admit. But I think both parties have incentive for this news to break today. So NVIDIA wants to publicly kind of leverage the government, if you will, and say, look, we've received assurances so that it's harder for the government to kind of back off of this later. And I'm sure that the administration isn't mad about any news that would break today that would shift attention away from the inflation data. So I think their incentives are aligned for this news to break today. Whether someone masterminded that or not, I don't know, but I don't think either party's mad about this news breaking today.
Well, there isn't anything in here that seems like there is, stated coordination between the two. So I would tend to kind of stick by my guns and say I don't think that it was masterminded. But I am really interested when I connect dots like this, because I think if you're just like, oh, market's up, market's down, you're missing a point. If you say companies up, companies down, these issues are affecting directional stock prices. That's another level down, but it's still not the mastery. It's really the interplay between each one of these policy decisions and organizational decisions where you see exemplary leadership, communication strategy, and also pricing come into play. So, if you want to get more detail on our NVIDIA breakdown, we've done a really deep dive on NVIDIA. We'd love for you to check out that episode because it's, I think, important to know I think that we started the conversation saying we know this much about NVIDIA. We'd like to know this much. We'd love to know, right, this really deep dive on where NVIDIA is. And so we did a lot of the work for you on that. And we'd love for you to join in to understand what's going on.
So we'll pop
Devon,
a link
anything
in the
else you want to add?
description. Yeah, we'll pop a
Cool.
link in the description to that deeper dive episode. And I think that's good companion listening, once you listen to this to kind of go and do a deeper dive into NVIDIA's business model.
Awesome. Well, with that, markets are open. Businesses is raring to go. Opportunities are everywhere inside the markets, but mostly outside the markets. And we hope that you find opportunities for that. Plus, if you've got ideas for how to celebrate my 13-year-old's birthday, I'd absolutely love to hear them.